as you can imagine. All right, one more time. Here we go. All right, looks like it's cooperating with me now. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, everyone. I am Cassandra White. I'm a grants program manager at the Division of Arts and Culture, and this is a webinar focused on helping you succeed on the final report for your 2023-2024 grants.
And I am Jennifer Goodo. I'm a grants manager here at the Division.
We're joined by Sandy Shaughnessy, who is the head of our lovely division. We're going to go through your final report as it appears in the grant portal. If you want to open that up now to follow along, please feel free. During the presentation, we're going to ask you to keep yourself muted and your cameras turned off. However, there is a chat feature available, so if you have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to drop it in the chat box. Samantha Arroyo is there monitoring the chat. I don't see if we have anybody else from our division in here, but we're always happy to have Sammy along with us, and she'll be able to answer questions as we go. We'll also have time for a Q&A at the end of the presentation.
All right, let's get started. We are going to start in the grant details section of the final report. The first question here is asking about your grant activities as they compare to the application. For this, it's helpful to pull up your application and refer to the grant activities as well as the objectives. This section of the report does not need to be written as a narrative. It can be written with the objectives and methods from your application in list format. For the entirety of this report, you're reporting on what you actually did and how it compares to what you said you would do. I've given an example of what one entry in this list might look like. If you presented the same activity multiple times, or if it is part of a series, please group those and list all of the dates or the date range that you held that activity. For grant details, the majority of this section focuses on how you did your evaluation and what you learned from it. As you know, evaluating the program was part of what you agreed to do in your contract. Grant managers are mostly looking for whether you conducted your evaluation. We leave it up to panelists to give you feedback on evaluation methods for your applications. You will describe how the evaluation was conducted, the methods used to collect participant feedback, when the evaluation took place, and the findings. Most importantly, you will describe how you will utilize these findings for future activities. The last section of the grant details is your support materials. This is the space where you upload promotional documentation or other materials showing you administered your grant funds. We are looking for some very specific information here. We need to see the logo or the statement giving credit to the Department of State Division of Arts and Culture. This should show the use of the division's new logo, as we explained in the How to Manage Your Grants webinar. The other thing we are looking for is appropriate accessibility symbols to show that the facility and programming are accessible. The use of accessibility symbols is strongly encouraged for all marketing materials, including brochures, programs, catalogs, any other printed materials, websites, and digital communications. Please see the graphic here for some of the accessibility symbols you might use. We've also included a list of the accepted file formats and size limits for each. For this report, you can upload 3 attachments, so please be judicious with what you choose and make sure you get those 2 things in.
Now on to the grant impact section of the report. A lot of this will be familiar to those of you who just finished filling out the applications for the next funding cycle. We first ask how many actual events were part of the grant. Remember to only list unique events during the grant period. A musical performed 10 times and a workshop presented once are both one event. The next question looks at the opportunities for public participation that were part of this grant. Each event has a minimum of one opportunity, so the number of opportunities cannot be less than the number of events. This question allows you to account for multiple instances of the same event. A musical performed 10 times is one event with 10 opportunities for public participation. The next section is one where we see a lot of confusion. The top question is the total number of individuals who benefited. This number should equal the total of the boxes A through E. For this whole section, do not count individuals reached through TV, radio, cable broadcast, or the internet or other media. Also, do not count repeat attendees. So if you had someone who came to every performance of that musical with 10 opportunities for each public participation, only count that person once. For each event, you can count that person again. For the following boxes, we define adults as individuals aged 18 through 64. Youth are people under the age of 18. We don't expect you to have an exact age for everyone attending. Please use your best information. Youth attending through their school count as school-based youth. Youth attending outside their school count as non-school-based youth. Older adults are individuals over the age of 65. Looking at any ticket or admissions you have with a senior discount is often a good way to find this number. When we ask how many artists were directly involved, we mean professional artists who provided artistic services for grantees. They must be professionals. You also should count living artists whose work is represented in the exhibition. No counting Mozart as someone who benefited. Question 3F asks for the number of Florida artists directly involved. This number cannot be greater than the total number of artists listed above. The next question in impact asks about the demographics of your audience. For question 4, population benefited by age, there are only 4 areas that you can choose from. So you cannot have any group that didn't make up 25% or more of the population benefited by age. Do not choose no single group. Question 5 asks about the population benefited by distinct groups. We ask that about federally recognized groups, individuals with disabilities, individuals in institution, including people living in hospitals, hospices, nursing homes, assisted care facilities, correctional facilities, and homeless shelters, individuals below the poverty line, individuals with limited English proficiency, and military veterans/active duty personnel. For this question, you can click No Distinct Group because not all of your attendees will fall into one of these categories. Questions 6 and 7 are fairly self-explanatory. How many staff do you currently employ? And how many new staff or outside contractors were added during the grant period? For these questions, because question 7 includes outside contractors, you may have more people counted in question 7 than question 6. Now we move to the location that you serve. There are 2 parts to this. The first question asks where the project or program actually takes place. We're asking for the physical location, not where your guests are coming from. If your programming is physically taking place in Alachua County, that will be the county where your project or program takes place. Now, if you're going into other counties and actually physically doing programs there, these counties would need to be checked. And if you're doing virtual programming, you will select the county where you are located because you're broadcasting from there. However, if there are people coming to you from other places, you will record those numbers in the second question. That's the distinction. You may have a large museum and get visitors from every county in Florida. Then you would record all of them as the counties that you serve. But your museum is still only in Alachua County. Please be realistic here and not optimistic. Did you have a lot of people attending from the surrounding counties? Great, include those. The last section of your impact asks about your virtual programming. Remember, this is not just maintaining a website. This is actual programming that you have made digital. If you are a museum and have virtual exhibits, or if you put your performances on YouTube, those both count. These must still have been produced or presented digitally during the grant period. How many opportunities did you present digitally? Each event counts as one opportunity for virtual programming. The last question asks about how many people participated in virtual interactions with your organization. Please refer to your digital metrics for this data. This does not count people reached through advertising.
The next long section is data that we report to the National Endowment for the Arts, the NEA. The first three are fairly straightforward. Please pick your primary project discipline. This should reflect the discipline you applied through. The type of activity is a long list. I recommend reading through it carefully and picking the one that best suits your organization. Think about how the majority of people interacted with your programs. There are 5 primary strategic outcomes: creation, engagement, learning, livability, or understanding. Again, you can only pick one, so please pick the one that best reflects the activities during this grant period. Question 4 asks about arts education. The NEA defines arts education as an organized and systemic educational effort with the primary goal of increasing an identified learner's knowledge of and/or skills in the arts with measurable outcomes. You can choose that you had 50% or more, less than 50%, or no activities for arts education. The population benefited by race and ethnicity uses federally recognized categories for race and ethnicity: American Indian / Alaskan Native, Asian, Black or African American, Hispanic or Latino, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, or white. We do not expect you to provide an exact percentage here. You are simply checking if any of these categories make up more than 20% of your audience. You will almost certainly have one group that does, so please think carefully before hitting the No Single Group button. The last question here asks for the location of your project activities. Please use an actual address for this question. Our lovely colleague Terry compiles all of the addresses where you did your grant activities for the National Endowment for the Arts. If you just put the name of the school, park, or theater, she has to manually look them up and list them for the NEA. So please, let's all make Terry's life easier. This question is required for both GPS and SCP. GPS, if you have a main theater, you can list your facility's address as the location. If you move around to different locations, please list all of them. Now for the part that seems to give everyone the most grief, the grant budget. The first section, Budget at a Glance, reflects what is entered in the rest of the form. You cannot edit this section, but it will update when you save your changes below. Your actual budget expenses, this will auto-populate with your grant budget. If you've filed an amendment, it will populate with that updated budget. Update this section to reflect your actual budget. Each budget category cannot be more than plus or minus 20% of your grant's budget. If you are off by more than the 20% for cash match, enter a note in box 5 at the bottom to explain. The actual budget income reflects all the income you received during the grant period. The exception is state and federal funds, which are not allowed in the actual budget income. If you received income in excess of actual expenses, you must enter how this will be used in box 4. The expenditure log section will take you to the expenditure log that you've been working on all grant period. This is a good time to check that you've entered everything correctly. If you find mistakes, please ask your grant manager to return the relevant section of the log to you. Make sure that you fill in all the columns. We'll discuss that in the next 2 slides. To delete a row in the log, you must make sure all fields are blank. Edit your actual budget expenses so that they match the category totals in the expenditure log. Again, the budget in the final report auto-populates with the budget numbers, but your log may be different. I recommend exporting the log to Excel and doing your addition by budget line there. Now we are going to quickly review the information from the Managing Your Grants webinar for the expenditure log. I know it has been almost a year since many of you watched that one. We also have a focused webinar just on the expenditure log if you have more questions on this section. That's available on our YouTube page. You only need to enter info either in the invoice box or the transaction box. If you have an invoice number, you can use it in the invoice box, or you can enter a check number or a direct deposit reference number in the transaction box. In any case, one of these two boxes must have information. The payment date is the date on the check or the date that the bank executed the direct deposit box. The payee is the name of the person or organization that you paid. While it can be the name of one of your employees, it cannot be the name of your organization. The one exception to this is individual artists paying themselves a salary. The transaction total is the amount you wrote on the check or you sent through EFT. Under grant funds, you enter the amount you wish to Under grant funds, you enter the amount you wish to allocate to grant funds. It can be a portion of the transaction total, or it can be the total. Obviously, it cannot be more than the transaction total. Leave blank the cash match and in-kind boxes unless you are balancing the rest of the check. So if you only have $50 in grant funds left, but your transaction is for $168, put $50 in the grant funds and $118 in the cash match. The deliverable number should correspond to the deliverable for which you are reporting expenses. For example, if you have received the first payment and are documenting how you spent those funds before requesting the second payment, you should choose number 1. If you don't have a clear idea of which payment these expenditures were associated with, please just put the number for the quarter where the payments happened. The budget item box is very important. Here, you need to select the budget category for which you are reporting grant funds. So you need to check the contract details and make sure you are selecting the correct one. The description box is optional, but here, if you wish, you can give a brief description of the expenditure. When all information is entered, click Update, and the transaction will appear in the expenditure log.
We are almost to the end of the report. The Florida Single Audit Act requires recipients and subrecipients to have state single audit if they have $750,000 or more in state financial assistance and expended during the non-state entity's fiscal year. The Federal Single Audit Act requires recipients and subrecipients to have a single audit if $750,000 or more in federal financial assistance is expended during the non-state entity's fiscal year. You notice that we are specifically looking at non-state entities for this requirement. Non-state entities are a local government entity, higher education entity, nonprofit organization, or for-profit organization that receives state financial assistance. Before checking this box, check your organization detail page and click the tab for the Single Audit Act. You have 9 months from the end of your fiscal year to complete the certification form and submit it and audit if required. Now is a good time to complete that certification so you don't have to remember to do it later. We will be checking for those. Last things, please verify that your information is correct. If it is not, update it in your organization profile page. This is a good chance to make sure that you only have people who are still with your organization on your staff list. For the grant contact, make sure that the current person is listed. This is who we will contact if there are any issues with the final report. And then you certify and submit. Huzzah! The final report is due July 30th. So if we find any issues with your report, we will return it to you for edits. Remember, if you are late, you will be placed in non-compliance the next day. Similarly, if we return it to you for edits and you do not complete them in the allotted time, you will be placed in non-compliance. For those of you applying for grants for 2025 to 2026, your panels will be told if you are in non-compliance on the day of your panel, and that can affect your score. These are some of the links for useful information: the Managing Your Grants page, DOS Grants, and our calendar. And that is all, folks. Here are all the division staff and program managers with their emails. We will be posting a link to the recording and a copy of the slides on the Managing Your Grants section of the division's website. There will also be a copy of the recording on the division's YouTube channel. Time for questions and answers. Please feel free to put any questions in the chat box. Ooh, so far, no questions. Nobody was burning to ask anything. That's always a good sign. Sammy, were there any other questions from earlier that I need to look at? Doesn't look like it.
No, ma'am.
Thank you. All right, folks. Oh, thank you, Doug. I appreciate the compliment. If there are no questions, we're going to stop this webinar recording and get you on to the rest of your days. Have a lovely day.